How do you begin addressing this, and why is this happening? All questions that we will try to address this morning with Evan Bernstein, the Regional Director of the New York and New Jersey Anti-Defamation League. And Evan, welcome again to Up Close.
Thank you, Bill.
You know, I look back on our interview we did in April, and it was so bad back then.
Yes.
And it's gotten worse.
And
I'm not sure I thought it would get worse. I thought, okay, we're talking about it, it's going to get better, and it hasn't.
No, it's you know, the spate of incidents that we saw over Hanukkah that were bookend, you know, with Jersey City murders or domestic terror, anti-Semitic, and then, you know, at the end of Hanukkah having this horrific act that you just described take place in Muncie. And I was on the ground at 11 o'clock at night right after it happened on Shabbat. I lit candles with my own family and I got the call what happened in Muncie. Was there overnight until 6 o'clock in the morning talking with, you know, members of the community. I was in the synagogue with Rabbi Rottenberg before the crime scene was even fully established by the FBI, and to be just a week before that, really a week and a half before that, in Jersey City on the ground during an active shooter, and then having to be in Brooklyn and Crown Heights, Williamsburg, which is the spate of attacks that we saw in between those horrific events. The community is reeling right now, and the Jewish community, specifically the Hasidic Orthodox community, is feeling very targeted and incredibly unsure about what their future looks like.
And it was great that Rabbi Chaim Rottenberg in fact, gave the invocation at Governor Cuomo's State of the State address this past week, and I think that was obviously a political move, you know, social move, socially conscious move by the governor to say, hey, look, we've got to come together here. How did we get here? That's really the issue, I think, because that's the way to open the door to a solution.
I think the challenge is we've seen this kind of ramping up. That's why you and I talked, you know, in April, and unfortunately there was incidents, you know, streaming in, you know, for the year or two before that. I mean, I think what's happened is, especially in Brooklyn, we've seen assaults that were taking place almost monthly, you know, and I think the spate of attacks that took place in, you know, 10 in a week's period, especially during the Hanukkah holiday, I think rose up awareness in the community of what was already going on in Brooklyn for an extended period of time. And then to have two really violent acts, you know, there was 5 that were stabbed in Muncie. 1 is still in critical condition, may never wake up out of his coma. And then we clearly had the people that were murdered in the Jersey City kosher market with anti-Semitic tendencies by both those shooters. It's something I think it's been ongoing. I think now we're seeing it tighter and worse than we have in the past. And I think that is where we see a pyramid of hate at the ADL. We've seen the normalization of anti-Semitic swastika and graffiti. We've now seen the normalization, I really believe, of assaults. And I'm concerned about the normalization of anti-Semitic murder when in 18 months you had Poway, Pittsburgh, Poway, and then Jersey City. Right. And if you looked at the response of all 3 publicly, they lessened each time.
You know, there are a lot of people who get angry. President Trump's supporters, the most ardent supporters, get angry when you say, well, you know, it starts at the top, some of this leadership question. And when you have a president who says, well, there are people on both sides, good people on both sides of the issue. Well, that's just not true when it comes to anti-Semitism. They would say, well, we weren't talking about that. We were talking about Confederate flags. But in fact, those were Nazis. Those were white supremacists in Charlottesville 2.5 years ago. And they're not good people on both sides of the issue. I think we've seen that over the last 2.5 years.
That's right.
Can you deal with this without addressing that question? Because that's a sensitive political question.
It is. I think the challenge is there's many faces of anti-Semitism. And I think a lot of times as a community we want to throw all anti-Semitism on white supremacy. And what we're seeing here in the New York, New Jersey area is not white supremacy.
No, some of them were black attackers, right?
That's right.
Black Israelites, and I don't think a lot of people had heard of that group before.
No, and there's issues with them also in Florida earlier in the year. They're clearly rising up, and I think, you know, what we're hearing from law enforcement and from our own Center on Extremism is that their online presence is ramping up, and that's where people are getting more and more activated. The 2 that were the shooters in Jersey City, they weren't officially part of that group, but they were getting their information online, and they were getting more and more activated because of what they were reading, even though the group would not officially, you know, actually take them in. I think what you're seeing is the many different faces, and I think you can't put all anti-Semitism is on the left, it's on the right, it's on the center. It's the oldest form of hate that we know, and I think the fact that you have to look at it in very careful ways. It's not, you can't put a huge blanket over anti-Semitism. You have to look at where it's coming from, why is it happening, and do everything we can to use our resources, whether it's white supremacy or unfortunate, you know, attacks by minority communities on Jews here in New York and in Jersey.
It is so puzzling because there are something like 16 million Jews around the world. It is infinitesimal, the Jewish population worldwide. This is a small, you know, you have 1 billion Muslims, 1 billion Catholics, 15 million Jews. That's just nothing. And yet the hatred, you just said it, it's the longest standing hatred that there is.
That's right. That's right.
So where do you begin to do it? You're trying. This last week you had a meeting, right, with the NAACP.
Yeah, this morning we met with Richard Smith, who is the president of the chapter of the NAACP for the state conference, and we announced a formal partnership this morning in Trenton. Our leadership came together where we're going to be working together to, speak out on bias that happens together. We've seen, unfortunate, a lot of members of the community, even members of the NAACP, that have now been denounced by the New Jersey chapter. They've spoken out very negatively about the Orthodox community, especially in Jersey City, and really almost blaming them for their being shot. So it's good that we have partners and we're standing together. We need to do more of that. We need to stand together and help train leaders together, NAACP and ADL, so they understand this kind of rhetoric that they're spewing out is very harmful and hurtful and is not going to help anybody.
Well, it's good to have the big groups. I mean, you were in this big group last week with Eric Adams, the borough president of Brooklyn, in which he wanted to sort of have this breaking bread thing with all these different religions, and that's fantastic.
Yes, it is.
But they're not reaching the people we need to reach yet.
I think, certainly all the table talks we can have with different minority groups and people conversing and talking is going to help build bridges. There's no question. I think the challenge is that right now we're seeing this rift between the other minority communities and the Hasidic population, and we cannot blame the victim. Jews are being attacked. If you look at the NYPD numbers, it's staggering. But there needs to be better communication. The others need to understand why the Hasidic populations do what they do. They need to understand their cultural norms and their religious norms. We need to start breaking down those barriers.
Does that include talking about some of the economic realities that are creating some of these tensions?
100%. We need to start talking openly about gentrification. We need to start talking about housing. We need to start talking about old stereotypes and anti-Semitic tropes that are in these communities, because I think they all are connectors. We don't have enough information. We need to get more information from NYPD and from our for district attorneys. We don't know enough about these perpetrators and why exactly they're doing this.
Well, you're going to keep doing that, I assume.
100%.
On an individual basis and a group basis. Evan Bernstein of the Anti-Defamation League in New York and New Jersey. Thank you for coming again, Evan.
Thank you, Bill.
And I hope we don't see you for a while. I hope we can.
I hope so too.
I hope you can help decrease this number of hate crimes. Just ahead, we're turning now to politics and our political team. We're going to talk about the U.S. tensions with Iran again, the impeachment showdown, and a lot more. That's next on Up Close.